I was sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning, not working, not reading, not doing anything that would justify the lights being on. And I realized something that cracked me open in a way I was not prepared for. I had everything. I mean that literally. I had the apartment, I had the car, I had the reputation, the trajectory, the calendar packed so tight there was no white space left on any given day, because white space felt like failure. I had the gym routine, the meal prep containers lined up in the fridge like little soldiers, the savings account with the number I'd been chasing since I was 23 years old, sitting in it, finally, quietly, doing nothing. I had the LinkedIn profile people messaged me about. I had the texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years that came in whenever something went well, congratulating me on something they'd seen from a distance, and I'd reply with, "Thank you, means a lot," and feel nothing. Absolutely nothing. I sat there at 2 in the morning and the apartment was silent in a way that apartments are only silent when you've been filling them with noise for so long that the quiet becomes a presence of its own. And I remember thinking, not dramatically, not in the way movies prepare you for, just a quiet, flat thought like reading a weather report. This is empty, not sad, not broken. Empty, like a room that's been furnished and cleaned and lit beautifully for guests who were never invited. I want to talk to you today, not at you, not to inspire you in the way that rings hollow after 20 minutes. I want to talk to you the way I wish someone had talked to me when I was building and building and building and calling it living, because I think some of you know exactly what I'm describing. You've felt it. Maybe at the end of a long day that should have felt like a victory. Maybe in the middle of a celebration you organized for yourself. Maybe looking at your phone at midnight, reading through the messages of people who need something from you, and noticing that not a single one of them is simply asking how you are. I built a life that looked like a monument and felt like a waiting room, and I need to tell you how that happened. And what I learned on the other side of it, here's where it starts, and I know this might sting a little, so stay with me. I was very young when I learned that love had conditions, not because anyone told me that. Nobody sat me down and said you will only be valued for what you produce. It was quieter than that. It was in the way praise arrived, never just for being, always for doing. It was the look on a face when I brought home a grade versus the absence of any particular look when I walked into a room just to be in it. It was the unspoken curriculum of childhood that some of us absorb deep into our bones, that presence alone is not enough, that you have to earn your place at the table, that stillness is laziness, that vulnerability is weakness wearing the disguise of honesty. I learned it so completely that by the time I was an adult, I didn't experience it as a wound, I experienced it as a personality. I called it discipline, I called it ambition, I called it standards. And those things were real, don't misunderstand me. But underneath them, quietly powering everything, was a 7-year-old boy who had decided that if he just became impressive enough, he would never have to be afraid of being left. I thought if I made myself indispensable, I would become safe. I thought if I kept everything private, nothing could be used against me. I thought if I appeared to have it together, no one would look closely enough to find the places where I didn't. And so I built. I just kept building. I built a persona before I built a person. I know that's a hard sentence. Read it again if you need to. I built a persona, a curated, consistent, defensible version of a man before I ever sat still long enough to ask who I actually was underneath the performance. I built routines so that I wouldn't have to feel. If your 5 a.m. alarm goes off and you're moving before your mind catches up, you never have to lie in bed and sit with the question of whether your life is actually yours. Busyness is the most socially acceptable form of avoidance we have. Nobody pulls you aside and says you seem like you're running from something. They say you're so disciplined. They say, I don't know how you do it. And you smile and say something modest and you keep running. I built walls and I decorated them like windows. That's the sophisticated version of what I did. I became warm in controlled doses, open in practiced ways, generous with my time in environments where generosity was witnessed. I knew how to seem present. I had learned the vocabulary of emotional availability without the substance of it. I knew when to ask a follow-up question in conversation, when to offer the right silence, when to say that must have been hard, and I meant it genuinely for other people. But when the moment came for me to be on the receiving end of that kind of care, something in me locked. I would redirect, I would minimize, I would say, I'm fine, honestly, I just need to sleep, and I would say it in a tone that gently but firmly closed the door, and the other person would feel that, and they would let it go, and I would be alone again, which was exactly what I'd engineered, which I was then miserable about. That's the loop. That's the prison. You build the walls that make you feel safe, and then you are alone inside them, and the aloneness confirms your original fear, that being truly known would lead to being left, so you build the walls higher. Don't deny it. Some of you are in that loop right now. Some of you are reading this at a time when you are the most externally successful you have ever been and the most internally lonely you have ever felt, and you haven't told a single person because telling someone feels like a betrayal of the image you've worked so hard to maintain. I see you. I was you. Tell me something. When was the last time someone asked how you really were? Not as a greeting, not as a social nicety, but as a genuine question, and you answered honestly? Not fine, busy, good. Actually, honestly. When was the last time you let someone see the part of you that doesn't know what it's doing, that's afraid, that's tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix? If you can't remember, that's information, because here's what I learned, and this took me longer to understand than almost anything else I've ever tried to understand. The people who love you most can't love the parts of you they don't know exist. You can't be truly known and strategically hidden at the same time. You have to choose. And most of us, without even deciding consciously, choose hidden, because hidden feels safer. Hidden means the version of you that people admire can stay intact. Hidden means nobody ever sees the moments when you are small or scared or uncertain or just plain wrong. But hidden also means alone. Deeply, consistently, quietly alone. Even in a room full of people who are proud of you. She came into my life on an ordinary Tuesday. I want to be careful how I say this, because she is not a fairy tale. She is not the answer to a question. She is not a symbol or a savior or a narrative device that appeared at the right moment to show me the light. She is a person, and what she did, what she kept doing slowly without making it a project, was refuse to be satisfied with the version of me I was used to presenting. She didn't push. That's the thing that unsettled me. I had defenses built for people who pushed. I had smooth, practiced responses for people who asked too much, who wanted too much access, who made me feel crowded. I knew how to make that kind of person feel gently but firmly that they were asking for something I didn't have. She didn't push. She just stayed. She stayed in the conversation past the point where I'd redirected it. She noticed when something I said didn't match my face, and she didn't make a scene of it. She just sat with it, and sometimes she'd say, "You don't have to explain it. I just noticed." And that combination of words undid something in me that I did not expect. You don't have to explain it. I just noticed. Do you know what that does to someone who has spent their entire adult life explaining himself into acceptance? Do you know what it does to hear that your presence, not your explanation, not your justification, not your carefully constructed narrative, just your presence, even when it's complicated, is enough to be stayed for? I didn't know what to do with that, genuinely. I sat across from her one evening and I felt the urge to perform, to be witty, to be insightful, to say something that would confirm I was worth sitting across from. And she was just looking at me with this calm, unhurried attention, and the performance felt ridiculous, like showing up to a quiet dinner in a suit of armor. Look at me for a second. I need you to understand what I'm about to say, because it's the thing that changed the shape of everything for me. She didn't make me feel safe. I don't mean that she made me feel unsafe. I mean that the feeling of safety I felt around her wasn't something she was doing to me. It was something being revealed in me. Like a room that had always been there behind a door I had decided years ago was not worth opening. She was honest with me in ways I hadn't been ready for. Not cruel, not careless. Honest in the way that only someone who genuinely respects you can be honest. She told me once, quietly, without drama, that she felt like she was watching someone audition for a role in their own life. And I was angry, and then I was quiet, and then I was devastated because I knew she was right. That's what presence does. That's what someone's full, unhurried, non-agenda attention does. It holds up a mirror that your own self-concept has been carefully avoiding for years. I had been auditioning. I had been performing competence and capability and composure so consistently that I had lost track of where the performance ended, and I began. And she saw that, not with judgment, with a kind of patient, clear-eyed recognition that asked, gently, by simply being, "Who are you when you stop performing?" I didn't have an answer. That was the terrifying part. I didn't have an answer. Here is what I built, and I want you to hear this clearly. I built an empire. I'm not being arrogant. I'm being precise. I built an empire of achievement and reputation and discipline and output and carefully managed distance. I built something that looked from the outside like a life and felt from the inside like a long, exhausting job I couldn't quit. I built rooms for productivity and rooms for ambition and rooms for recovery and rooms for strategy. I built and I built and I built, and at the center of all of it, at the place where a foundation should have been, there was nothing. There was an absence, a hollow in the shape of a person. The collapse, when it came, was not dramatic. I wish I could tell you it was dramatic. I wish I could give you a story with a clear before and after, a moment of crisis that announced itself with appropriate gravity. But it was just 2 a.m. in an empty apartment, and a flat, quiet thought that cut through all of it like a letter opener. This is empty. And then the second thought, the one that followed so quietly it almost didn't arrive. I think I've known that for a long time. Wait, before you scroll, I know this is getting uncomfortable. I know some of you have been nodding along and some of you have been checking out because this is hitting something you'd rather not sit with right now. And I understand that. I've been that person, reading something or watching something and feeling the uncomfortable recognition and reaching for my phone to find something easier because easier is always available. But I'm asking you to stay, because what comes next is the part that actually matters. The collapse is not the end. That's the thing I most needed to understand and most resisted believing. The empty moment, the 2 a.m. silence, the flat recognition, the terrible clarity of a life that looks right from the outside and feels wrong from the inside. That is not the end of your story. That is the foundation being cleared. You cannot build something real on top of something hollow. The universe or your psychology or whatever framing feels true to you, it will not allow it forever. Eventually, the hollow finds a way to announce itself. Eventually, the weight of everything you've built on top of nothing presses down far enough that the nothing becomes undeniable. And that is not punishment. That is mercy. I know that's not what it feels like. I know when you're in it, it feels like failure. It feels like proof that every fear you ever had about yourself was right. It feels like the moment when everyone who believed in you is going to find out the truth. But here's what I learned. The truth is not that you're not enough. The truth is that you have been trying to become enough by running from the parts of yourself that most need your attention. The collapse is not the proof of your inadequacy. The collapse is the invitation to meet yourself. Actually meet yourself, not the version of yourself you've been building and presenting, the one underneath. The real one, that one has been waiting a long time. I want to tell you about the altar. There's a thing I realized, sitting with her over coffee on a morning when the light was doing something particular through the window, and I was finally, for the first time in a very long time, not thinking about anything I was supposed to be doing. I realized that I had built an altar to achievement. Not a metaphorical altar, I mean a practical daily life altar organized around the worship of output. Everything I owned was in service of it. Everything I scheduled was in service of it. My identity, my sense of safety, my measure of a good day, all of it was organized around what I had done, what I had produced, what I had moved forward, and I had placed my worth on that altar. That's the problem. That's the whole problem. When your worth sits on the altar of your productivity, you are only as worthy as your last output. When you have a bad day, a slow month, a season of stagnation, which every human being has, which is simply what being human includes, you don't experience it as a season. You experience it as evidence. Evidence of what you feared, evidence that you are at the bottom of it, not enough. And so you push harder. And the pushing produces more results temporarily, and the results feel like relief temporarily. And then the relief fades and the fear returns and you push harder again. The altar demands more. The altar always demands more. She was sitting across from me that morning and I was trying to articulate this and I said something like, I think I've spent my whole life trying to earn a peace that I thought was on the other side of enough. And she was quiet for a moment and then she said, what if the peace was never on the other side of anything? I didn't have a response. I just sat with it. And for the first time and as long as I could remember, sitting with something without immediately moving to solve it felt okay. Not comfortable. I want to be honest about that. But okay. Survivable. Like the first few minutes in cold water when you stop fighting it and discover that your body can actually adapt. Here's what the rebuilding looked like. Because I want you to know it was not a single moment. It was not one conversation, one realization, one dramatic turn. It was a series of small, unglamorous daily choices that accumulated so slowly I couldn't always see them happening. It was asking for help once on a Tuesday about something small and discovering that the world did not end, that the person I asked didn't look at me differently, that the asking didn't cost me the respect I'd been so afraid of losing, and then asking again and again until asking became possible in the way that breathing is possible, not because there's no resistance, but because the resistance is no longer the thing in charge. It was sitting in a room with her on an evening when I was genuinely upset about something and not redirecting, just letting her see it, not performing the emotion, not being theatrical or self-pitying, just not hiding it, not managing it into a shape that would be easier for both of us. And discovering slowly, with a kind of awe I can barely describe, that being seen in the small broken moments didn't result in being left, that it resulted in being closer, that the thing I had been protecting myself from, real intimacy, real knowing, was not a threat. It was the entire point. It was having a conversation with myself late one night that I had been avoiding for years about who I was building all of this for. Not philosophically, specifically, whose voice was in my head when I hit a goal, whose approval was I seeking, whose face was I imagining in the moment of achievement, and sitting with the answer, which was complicated, and which had a lot of grief in it, and which explained a great deal about the hunger that had been driving me for so long. I want to talk about identity for a moment, because this is the part nobody tells you about. When you have organized your entire sense of self around what you do, when your identity is your function, your output, your role, and you begin to let that go or it begins to fall away, there is a period of profound disorientation. You feel like you are disappearing. You reach for the old structure and it's not as solid as it was, and the absence of its solidity is terrifying in a way that is very hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. Because who are you without the hustle? Who are you without the productivity? Who are you in a quiet room on a Sunday afternoon with nothing to accomplish and nowhere to be? That question used to fill me with panic, genuine panic. I would fill Sundays with productivity just to avoid having to answer it. I would create artificial urgency to justify constant movement. And here's what I found on the other side of sitting with that panic long enough to let it pass. I found a person, a quiet, uncertain, curious, Occasionally funny, genuinely caring, deeply imperfect person who had been there the entire time, buried under the performance, patient in the way that only things that are very deeply true can afford to be patient. I found a person who actually liked some things, not for their career value or their networking potential or their alignment with a 5-year plan, just liked them. Liked the walk in the morning when there was no destination, liked the particular texture of a conversation that goes somewhere unexpected, liked the feeling of a room full of food made for people I cared about, liked specifically the look on her face when I said something that surprised her in a good way. That person had been there all along. I had just never stopped moving long enough to introduce myself to him. Here's what I learned about presence, and I mean this precisely. Presence is not the absence of productivity. I want to be clear about that because the story I'm telling could be misread as a rejection of ambition or effort or discipline, and it is not. It is a correction of the relationship to those things. Presence is doing one thing while doing one thing. It is being in the conversation you're in. It is putting the phone down, not as a statement, not because you've decided screens are bad, but because the person across from you is worth the uninterrupted attention that you have been giving to tasks that will still be there in an hour. Presence is letting a moment be complete without immediately converting it into content or a lesson or a story you'll tell later. It's the discipline of being in the experience rather than already narrating it. Presence is, when someone asks how you are, pausing long enough to actually check, not as a therapeutic exercise, just as a basic act of self-acquaintance. How am I? Actually, right now. I practice this. I am not always good at it. Some mornings I wake up and my mind is already in a meeting that won't happen for 6 hours. Some evenings I am physically present with her and mentally orbiting some problem that could wait until tomorrow. I notice this now in a way I didn't before. The noticing is not the same as always succeeding, but the noticing is everything. The noticing is the difference between being unconsciously absent and choosing, imperfectly, but genuinely, to return. Let me tell you about the bricks. Because this is the metaphor that has mattered most to me in the actual rebuilding. For a long time I thought transformation was about tearing everything down and starting over. There's a romantic version of reinvention that involves a clean slate. You burn the old structures, you walk away from the person you were, you build something entirely new from scratch. And I think for some people in some specific circumstances that might be right, but for me, and maybe for you, it was different. It was a brick at a time, a small, unsexy, daily brick, a conversation where I said what I actually meant instead of what would be well received. That's a brick. A morning where I sat still for 10 minutes and let the quiet be quiet instead of filling it. That's a brick. A moment of asking for what I needed, not as a demand, not dramatically, just clearly and honestly and without preemptively apologizing for having a need at all. Brick. A choice to tell her something true about my past that I had been keeping private, not because it was inappropriate to share, but because sharing it meant it was real, and being real about it meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant trusting that she wouldn't use it to reduce me. Brick. None of these bricks feel like much in the moment. They don't look like transformation from the inside. The first few times you do them, they feel awkward and effortful and slightly terrifying, and you don't get any feedback that tells you it's working. You just lay the brick and trust the process. But bricks accumulate gradually without announcement. You look up and there is a structure, not an empire, something smaller than an empire and infinitely more livable. Something with rooms where actual life happens. Something with warmth in it, because warmth requires presence, and presence requires the willingness to be known, and being known requires the courage to stop managing how you're perceived. A home instead of a monument, that's the difference. I spent years building a monument. A monument is for other people to see. A home is for you to live in. I want to be honest with you about the fear, because I think if I skip over it, I'm doing you a disservice. The fear doesn't go away. I want to be clear about that because a lot of what gets said about this kind of transformation implies that the work is about eliminating fear, and I think that's wrong. The fear of being truly known, the fear that underneath the performance there isn't enough, that the real version of you is somehow insufficient for the love you want. That fear is old. It is bone deep. It was learned in a context that no longer exists, by a child who no longer exists, and yet it persists with extraordinary tenacity. The work is not to eliminate it. The work is to stop letting it make all your decisions. Because here's what I noticed. The fear says, don't let her see that. And I can hear it now, where before I would have simply obeyed it without realizing there was a choice. I can hear it, and I can look at it, and I can say, okay, I hear you. I know where you came from. I know why you're here. And then I can choose with full awareness of the fear to let her see it anyway. That's not fearlessness. That's courage. There's a difference. Fearlessness is the absence of fear. Courage is acting in the presence of it. And courage, practiced brick by brick over time, doesn't make the fear smaller exactly. It makes you larger than the fear. It shifts the ratio. Until the fear is still there, still audible, but it is no longer the thing in charge of the room. She asked me once, it was early in all this, before I had fully named what was happening. She asked me why I kept everything private, not as an accusation. Genuinely curious, the way she tends to be genuinely curious about things in that unhurried way she has. And I said something deflecting, something smooth, some version of I'm just a private person that was technically true and substantially false. And she looked at me for a moment and she didn't push, she never pushed, but she said, I think there's a difference between private and protected. I didn't say anything, I just let that land. Private is a preference. Private is a personality. Private is choosing not to broadcast your inner life to every person who comes within conversational range, which is a perfectly reasonable choice. Protected is armor. Protected is the decision made long ago that the interior of you is not safe to expose, that the real you, unedited and unperformed, is something that must be defended rather than offered. I had been calling my armor privacy, and the reason I let her in, the reason I'm here talking about this, the reason I keep returning to this question of why she's different, is because somewhere in my body, before my mind had caught up, I recognized that she was not a threat to what I was protecting, that she was, in fact, the reason I had been protecting it. Not her specifically, but the possibility of her. The possibility of someone who could see the real thing and stay. That possibility had been the whole point all along. Here's what I want you to sit with, and I'm not going to soften this because I think you're capable of hearing it clearly. You are not going to find what you're actually looking for in any external achievement. I know that's not new information. You've heard some version of that before. But knowing it and feeling it in your body are two entirely different experiences, and most of us know it in our minds and deny it in our behavior for years before we actually feel it, the thing you are working so hard to build, the version of yourself that is finally impressive enough, successful enough, put together enough to deserve the love and the safety and the sense of being home. That version doesn't exist. Not because you're not enough, because sufficiency is not a destination. You can't achieve your way into feeling enough. You have to decide, you have to practice, you have to build it brick by brick out of the choices you make in quiet rooms when no one is watching. And here is the terrifying and liberating truth underneath all of it. You were enough before you built the empire. The 7-year-old who decided he had to earn his place was wrong. Not wrong to feel it, he felt it in his nervous system as clearly as temperature, and he was right to respond. But wrong about the conclusion. The conclusion was, become more impressive and you will become safe. The truth is, you were always allowed to be here. You don't have to earn it. You just have to stop running long enough to receive it. Look at me for a second. I know some of you are in the middle of the build right now. You're in the season of ambition and drive and production, and you're moving at a speed that feels necessary and right. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm not asking you to slow down in the ways that matter to you. I'm asking you to notice whether you're running towards something or away from it. I'm asking you to check, honestly, whether the drive is coming from inspiration or from fear. Whether the busy is purposeful or protective. You can be ambitious and present. You can be disciplined and known. You can build things that matter and still be home in the rooms where the building stops. It doesn't have to be one or the other. That was the lie I told myself, that the interior work and the external work were in competition. That softening meant weakening. That being known meant being less capable of the life I wanted to build. None of that was true. All of it was fear in a believable disguise. I want to end here. And I want to end honestly. Some mornings I wake up and the old patterns are right there. The urgency, the need to produce, the impulse to measure the day by what I accomplished rather than by how fully I was present in it. The temptation to give her the polished version of whatever I'm feeling rather than the actual one. Some mornings the armor is the first thing I reach for out of habit before I've even decided, and I notice it now. And I put it down not always gracefully, not always immediately. Sometimes I notice it halfway through a conversation when I realize I've been performing rather than speaking. Sometimes I notice it at the end of a day when I look back and recognize that I moved through it like a machine and missed the actual texture of being alive, but I notice it. And the noticing is the whole practice. The noticing is the ongoing commitment. The noticing is the brick laid again every day without ceremony. She is not my reason for this work. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. She is not the purpose of my transformation. She is a witness to it. A patient, honest, clear-eyed witness who offered me something I had never been offered before. The experience of being truly seen and genuinely stayed for. And that experience changed what I believed was possible for me. Not because she changed me, because she showed me that the version of me I had been hiding was the version most worth knowing. The love I wanted wasn't on the other side of the empire. It was on the other side of the wall. So here's my challenge to you. Not a task, not a checklist, not a 10-step framework. One question. And I want you to sit with it, not answer it immediately, not process it into a plan. Just sit with it the way you'd sit with a fire, letting the warmth do what it does before you decide what to do with it. Who would you be if you stopped performing for long enough to find out? Not the version of you that impresses people, not the version that has it together, not the version that earns its keep and justifies its existence and builds and builds and builds in the direction of some imagined sufficiency. Who is the person underneath all of that? The one who has been patient in there, the one who hasn't been given much space or much light or much permission to simply exist without justifying the existence. That person is not a project. That person is not a problem to solve. That person is not the weak version or the unfinished version or the version you'll deal with once everything else is handled. That person is you. The actual you, the one I'm talking to right now in whatever room you're in, at whatever hour this is finding you. And that person is worth knowing, worth staying for, worth building something real with, not a monument to what you've achieved, but a home for who you actually are. I kept everything private for a long time because I believed, without examining the belief, that the private version of me was the one that couldn't be trusted to be seen, that the public version, competent, composed, always moving, was the one worth showing and everything else was a liability. I was wrong. I was wrong in the specific, costly, years-long way that we are wrong about the things we most need to be corrected on. And she is different because she sees the private version and doesn't look for the exit, because she offers honesty without agenda, because she stays in the room after the performance stops and finds the silence comfortable rather than threatening, because her presence taught me, slowly, imperfectly, in the ordinary daily way that all the real teaching happens, that being known is not the thing to be afraid of. Being unknown is living in the monument and never in the home is building until the very end without ever asking if what you're building is what you actually want. That is the thing to be afraid of. The foundation was cleared the night I sat at my desk at 2 a.m. and felt the empty. The altar was dismantled slowly over coffee and honest conversations, and mornings I let be mornings without converting them into productivity. The bricks were laid one at a time, in the smallest of choices, in the ask for help and the honest answer, and the moment I didn't redirect, and the evening I let her see. The umpire is gone. I don't miss it. What I have instead is smaller and realer and warm, and in the center of it, where the hollow used to be, there is a foundation, actual bedrock. Not impressive from the outside, not designed for an audience, built for living, built for being, built for the long, imperfect, profound, ordinary miracle of being fully, finally, irreversibly here. That's enough. That was always enough. I just had to find my way back to knowing it.